Hello, my name is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about progressivism. Progressivism is the ideology of the left that most influences our major institutions of today. It dominates academia, it dominates the entertainment industry, it dominates the news industry. And while we like to think in terms of elections and parties, the fact is, most of our government is dominated by bureaucracies and by NGOs, which, even though they are explicitly called non-governmental organizations, have a profound impact on government and may as well be seen as governmental organs in their own right. And they are both, the bureaucracy and the NGOs, overwhelmingly run by progressives. Granted, the power of progressive politics, at least in the United States of America, is declining, and we are beginning to see cracks in the prevalence of progressive thought and the grip it has on society, even in European and Asian nations, though not as drastically as in America, largely owing to the larger-than-life personality of one Donald Trump. But it hasn't gone away. Progressivism today is largely referred to as woke because the exact formation of progressive thought, while still at its core the same as previous progressive thought, differs in specific details. And the modern progressive movement is largely seen as woke. That's what we call it, the woke movement. And we see wokeism declining. Although most people don't really realize how rapidly social change can occur, but how slowly it must occur in its effects. For example, many Hollywood studios have said that they are no longer going to be woke. They're going to pull back from their political activism. And people are calling them out as liars because as soon as they make those announcements, they also release woke films and woke movies and TV shows, or perhaps a few months later. And don't get me wrong, studios have lied in the past, but I am reticent to call them liars and dishonest. Because even if a studio that is all on board with the woke progressive messaging decided to suddenly bring it all to a halt, there are still films that they've already made in the can, made before their decision to stop the progressive political activism, that already exist. And it would actually not be advisable to keep them, or at least most of them, in the can. For one thing, even though a lot of people say, just don't release them, that's not always possible. Quite often, they are contractually obliged to release them. Either a distributor has already demanded the rights to release them, or they've already made arrangements with theaters, or they've already promised actors or producers. And to simply shelve the project would be a violation of those contract terms. There's also the fact that even if you expect a movie to fail, you will get at least some of your money back from it. This may sound counterintuitive, But even if a movie flops and makes no money at the box office, it doesn't turn a profit, the losses that one accrues can be lessened. If I make a movie for $100 million and then don't release it, I've simply thrown $100 million away in the production of the film. But if I make a movie for $100 million and release it to theaters, and my take of the final box office is only $200,000 or $300,000, then even though I've lost money, I have lost less money than if I had simply shelved it. If I shelve it, I make no money at all. And while I didn't turn a profit when I released it, the amount of loss is lessened. So I'm not really going to say that the Hollywood studios like Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount are lying to us when they say they have stopped the woke. But I do expect woke things from them for the next 2, 3, 4 years, maybe 5 years. Simply because those things are already in production or already in the can, and we already have obligations to release them, and it makes no sense to shelve all of them. Really, it only makes sense to shelve a movie if you know that there's going to be a major backlash from it. Not simply that it'll bomb, but that you will get a major backlash. And even then, if you know you're going to get a major backlash, but everything in your catalog is like that, shelving it all is just going out of business. The simple reality is, it will take a while for studios to turn around. And the same thing is going to be true with newscasting, with NGOs, with academia. Although with the last two, they haven't actually promised to give up the woke, and it will probably take even longer to turn them around, simply by virtue of the fact that they don't want to turn around. With academia, it may take a full replacement of the professors, as conservative students get their degrees and then start teaching in universities, being more bold and no longer being silent about it. Because the woke movement largely was generated through the academic world. It's who we turn to instead of churches and mosques and synagogues in a secular society. A society which ostentatiously has no religion, turns to its academia under its myth of reason and science. When in reality, the academic world is not really driven by reason and science so much as popular fads and ideology, especially these days. And they become little more than clergy for a modern secularist religion. And I both mean that in disparaging and pejorative terms and not. I don't think something being a religion inherently makes it bad. But I do think that the secularists think that looking at it as religion at least makes it less than rational, less than the academic should be. And many of them do see it as an insult. And it's because of the way they understand religion, as based on faith, which by definition means based on belief without evidence. I would argue that many traditional religious faiths are more rational than the rationalism of today, because the rationalism of today, the woke rationalism, the movements that gave us the atheists spouting off against religion, won't even admit that it has all the characteristics of a religion in its own right. They will instead play silly word games and insist you need belief in a god to be religious, even though they'll then turn around and call other atheist groups they don't like and want to distance themselves from religious. The Soviet Union, for instance, was actually run by religion, or at least religious thinking, and wasn't true atheism, for example. You can just look at the books by Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins telling us this. The same people telling us that it is impossible for an atheist to be religious will tell us that communists were religious and communism was a form of religion. There's a certain degree of convenience thinking when it comes to this. And in a point of fact, you don't actually see that many people that are in that movement actually being willing to admit that the same logic they use to say communism is a religion can be applied to themselves. They simply sidestep the issue because they rely heavily on the narrative that they are the secular and thus rational left. But given that we live in a world where the most secular countries are the most restrictive of our freedoms, and one of the most secular countries in Europe, Britain, the home place of free speech, has stripped people of free speech and is now arresting people over saying mean things online while allowing child rape gangs to roam free. All under the auspice of the first ever openly atheist prime minister in a country where Christianity is no longer the majority. Secularism reigns supreme in Britain, and so does crime. And the secularists, of course, blame religion, but they have a hard time doing so because the current woke narrative is you can't blame brown people, and Islam is a religion for brown people, so you're racist and Islamophobic. Islamophobic people are racist themselves because Muslims are brown people. And in this case, I have a little sympathy for those atheists who hate religion, but who also criticize Islam. I don't agree with their criticisms of Islam, but they are right that Islam is a religion, not a race, and that one can be any race and be a Muslim. But even the critics who make that argument, like the divine prophet Sam Harris, most holy, hallowed be his name, then turn around and say we should ethnically screen people who look like Muslims. So there is a bit of racism involved in some of the secular left that claims to reject wokeism. But therein lies the problem. They won't admit what they actually are. They are a political religion. They've had a schism between the atheism plus movement and the more conventional leftist views. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter because either one you pick will lead to a sort of authoritarianism. The only question is how far they take the authoritarianism and in what direction, which isn't much of a palatable choice. And for all their bluster about how the far right is going to destroy freedoms and the invocation of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and of course linking it to religion because Hitler was a devout Catholic and the Catholic Church adored him and signed a concordant with him because they loved him and rubber-stamped his beliefs, and Mussolini was a Catholic who believed in the Catholic faith and created a Catholic fascist country. All of that's garbage, of course. Mussolini was an atheist who hated the Christian faith, and Adolf Hitler hated Christianity. And the Catholic Church did sign a concordant with Hitler, but it wasn't because they loved and adored Nazi ideology and just had to support it. The concordant was not a rubber stamp to Nazi beliefs. It was an attempt to stop the Nazis from persecuting Catholics, which they did like Maximilian Mueller, like the Catholic newspaper man whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, who was arrested and sent, like the bishops of Germany, who, even though the divine prophet Christopher Hitchens, most holy, hallowed be his name, did decree in the sacred scriptures of the holy religion of atheism, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, that Hitler was never excommunicated. He actually was. All the Nazis were. Of course, I'm lying because I'm a religious person. She's gonna Hitch slap me. Hitchens never lied, and Hitchens was never wrong. Of course, Hitchens was a liar, and he was wrong. It's a historical fact that the Catholic Church condemned the Nazi movement. It never supported it. And it is a historical fact that Hitler and all Nazis were excommunicated. A modification was made when party membership became compulsory. But this wasn't because the church changed its position and said Nazism was okay. Rather, you would still be excommunicated if you joined the Nazi party willingly out of agreement with their beliefs. But if you joined the Nazi party simply because it became compulsory to join the party, and in order to retain your livelihood and support your family, you had to be in the Nazi party, you were not excommunicated. You were not excommunicated for doing something you had to do. You were only excommunicated for holding Nazi beliefs. The Catholic Church opposed the Nazis. And then after the war, communists seeking world revolution sent people to infiltrate academia, entertainment, media, and even churches. That's why a lot of seminaries started going left-wing and more bizarre in the 1950s, and by the 1960s we get Vatican II in the Catholic Church, and a lot of churches start supporting contraception more broadly than they had previously, and things like that. Though it wasn't as bad as people say. I remember reading a few years ago a newspaper article claiming that the Southern Baptist Convention used to have a much lighter stance on abortion and did not criticize it, with a requisite being that they only changed their teaching that abortion was okay, or that they were okay with abortion after segregation because they could no longer teach racism, so they changed it to abortion. This was nonsense, of course. There is no reason to think, even if the Southern Baptist Convention had no problem with abortion, seeing the pro-life movement as a Catholic thing, like the article said, and then changed their position in the 70s so that they opposed abortion. There was no reason to think their motive was because of the Civil Rights Act and they couldn't be racist anymore. There's no reason to think that the Southern Baptist Convention was promoting racism and segregation, but they lost that battle, so they changed over to abortion. There's no logic to it. The issues aren't really related directly. Unless you want to admit Margaret Sanger's racism, which they don't want to. And therein lies the point. They are saying the Southern Baptist Convention was racist and they could no longer promote their racism, so they changed over to pro-life, and there's no real logic to it. There's no evidence to support this. What's more, the evidence they used to support that the Southern Baptist Convention changed its teachings show that they have exactly the same teachings they have today. The myth is that they didn't oppose abortion. They had no problem with it. They saw opposition to abortion as a Catholic thing, that they didn't really have a problem with it, and it was only in the 70s that they changed their church teachings to oppose abortion. In reality, the evidence they used to support this was a resolution from one of the national conventions of the Southern Baptist Convention that stated that abortion was actually immoral and should be opposed. but should be allowed in cases of rape or incest. So even back in the 1960s, they didn't openly accept abortion. They simply exempted two things, rape and incest, from the considerations. And incidentally, that is the same position held by the Southern Baptist Convention to this day. They didn't change their teachings at all. The media lied to us. And they did so to craft their own narrative. They do this quite often. And now they're dying. People no longer trust them. People are turning from them. People listen to podcasters and newscasters now. Therein lies the point. Progressivism will not go away because we are not treating the underlying cause, which itself is something we don't want to admit to as a culture, especially as Americans. The very foundation of America gives rise to wokeism. Not directly. America's founding fathers weren't woke. But the idea that we should be allowed to do whatever we want, the idea that we, the people, are the highest authority, has given rise to a perverse sort of individualism, which focuses on a narcissistic desire to get what I want, including if I want to be a woman, you have to call me a woman, even though I'm not one. And you have to accept that I am a woman, that I'm just as much a woman as everyone else. And you have to use my preferred pronouns of she, her, because I said so. Or a woman can do the same, claiming to be a man. The justification for this is purely based on desire. We have made man sovereign and dethroned God, at least ideologically. God still sits on his throne. We are not capable of removing him from it in reality, but ideologically. We keep God about to make us feel better or to keep him in our private thoughts. But he does not rule our society. We, the people who bow to no kings, we rule. We have ignored and rejected nature. We reject the natural order, which leans more toward monarchy than to a republican system. And we desire a fundamental freedom to act out of accord with nature. And that will continue to plague us, no matter if we claim freedom or not. I don't have much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.